Recording is on.
Hello everyone, it's nice to hear the waves in Kefalonia Island in Greece. I don't know if I hear the sound well, but it seems like when it's recording it doesn't come as good across as good on the video, but that's just technical stuff. Today is the 1st of May. This is meeting Extinctionati meeting 107. And we are going to discuss various current affairs, I believe. And I will let maybe Gary start with a review of the various videos and subjects that have been posted on the sub this week.
Thanks. Look, I'm just wondering because we were just talking to DB about he was mentioning Noam Chomsky in a recent video with Just Stop Oil, and I think also just referring to the Arthur Keller video, which is posted on Extinctionati Reddit, Collapse, the Only Realistic Scenario. Did you want to just start off there, DB, and just say something, and we'll just get into this for a couple of minutes?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have the specific details on memorized, but when I was sitting there listening to Chomsky talk and the Just Stop Oil, a lot of the things that he was saying people need to do, like reducing the production of capitalism, like all the useless commodities we don't need, like he specifically mentioned, like targeted advertising to children to get them to buy, all those expensive toys and shit. And then, of course, winding down the oil economy, like all that stuff is basically saying we need to have a soft landing of civilization. I don't think he even realizes that.
Yeah. One of the points that the fellow Arthur Keller made in that video was that uh, that isn't feasible to wind back the kind of system that we have because it just goes into collapse anyway. There's so many aspects to where you could go with what Chomsky's saying there. And I think even going back to the earlier one, did we mention in the last meeting Gail Tverberg and her, because she does all these wonderful analyses of energy. And a lot of what you've got to see, if you start to collapse the demand for oil, it then goes into an even deeper collapse because um, uh, if it can't command a certain price, it's no longer economical to go and produce it, to actually pump it and refine it and all the rest of it. So you rely on a certain level of demand to keep the price up in order to keep the supply going. And so this militates against the idea of reducing production, which means reducing economic growth, in fact, putting economic growth into reverse kind of thing. Uh, and so, it sounds great when people like Chomsky say that. It sounds so logical and reasonable and all the rest of it. But there seems to be a lot of people who will question how it would play out in practice. Um, and I think the other thing to add on to anybody's comment about uh, oil is um, uh, that's basically what most people eat, and it's responsible for our food production. Um, and so, if you're looking at an economy which is reducing its oil consumption. Therefore, its oil consumption reduces even more because of the economics surrounding its production. You could then very easily come into a civilization that's got massive food shortages. Um, can we just get microphones muted there? Um, thanks. Yeah. Um, uh, anyway, I'll keep quiet there. Does anyone want to sort of jump in there just regarding the food consequences of reducing oil because we depend on it for food production, and also the kind of the question of reducing demand for oil suppresses the price, then suppresses the production, and then you end up in a difficult situation. So I'll keep quiet for a minute.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've never really put any kind of hopes in there being a soft landing because first off, the subjectivity to do that isn't even there to begin with. So, um, yeah, so we're still psychologically behind. So therefore it's not going to happen even if it was physically possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of these arguments that people put forward, which sound really good, they all they all seem to hinge on the word if. If we do this and if we do that, and and um, the fact is we haven't, and we're not going to. Um, it seems to be what it comes down to in the end. Is it doesn't matter how good a solution sounds and how plausible and practical and sensible and rational and all the rest of it. If there's no concerted movement in that direction.
But I think Arthur Keller, French actually, I listened to him about 2 years ago. I think I actually posted that a long, long time ago on XRMed. And I was very impressed by his presentation and his four um, charts. And, the last one, that's the only possible one and all this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, whether Chomsky, Keller, or just oil or most movements, where we come to is this presumptuous affirmation that humans can have a role to play, that we are kind of where we are at the top, we're going to save the planet, and this sort of thing, which comes back to what DB is saying. Psychologically, humanity is not prepared at all. So when people are trying to handle these problems, they're putting themselves as kind of, again, in that position of separation, as domination, as and that's where it starts to go wrong. I don't know if you follow, or I don't know if I'm explaining myself very clearly, but it's again this stupidity of the human being, presumptuous.
Um, yeah, because you could probably go back even further and say that all of the problems that we're facing actually come down to the psychological problem, the collective psychological problem that human beings have. Um, it's not. It would be easier, I guess, to say, oh well, if we were all enlightened, this wouldn't happen. But that's just another one of those if things. That's another if, and it's not going to happen either. um, but yeah, I think you see that's another part of the trap that leads to the inevitable collapse. Is I think the fact that we've got a collective psychological issue which cannot be addressed, and therefore the direction we're pointing becomes inevitable. Just thinking too about what you said about Arthur Keller. I looked at that name and I thought, it doesn't look like a very French name to me. you've, you've got the pronunciation different, I guess. Sorry, I got off the track. Do you want to make a comment there?
Well,
Oh yeah, I was just gonna. Oh, you go ahead, Sophie.
No, go ahead, DB. Go ahead. I was just laughing at what Gary said.
Yeah, I mean, I was just pondering, like, maybe humanity has reached a stage in history where technological control and like the ability to have cultural illusions has just made this like impossible to even like steer. Yeah, it's pretty overwhelming. Like I even wonder if anything like because in Hugh's videos he talked about how like human extinction was it's inevitable now probably, but he said it wasn't inevitable in the past when people were trying to, you know, get the alien cortex under control with meditation and stuff. But maybe since the alien cortex has the ability to like because we talked about how it has the ability to infinitely change through stories and stuff, that ability to infinitely change through stories gives it the ability to infinitely lie, and maybe one of those lies eventually works and then it gets the upper hand. I was wondering if that's a thing, like maybe that's what makes it inevitable.
Um, yeah, yeah. If we could, yeah. So you're but basically saying a better narrative. Um,
Well, I'm not sure if it's not a narrative. I'm just like
mm,
wondering because Hugh was saying that in the past, like human extinction wasn't inevitable because of meditation, but I was pondering maybe it probably is if you evolve an alien cortex because the shamans are basically trying to get people to, you know, spark up their inner life and not be, you know, completely swayed by amassing material gains and domination and stuff. But on the other hand, the lies that the alien cortex created to, you know, give rise to this culture, the dominators are getting armies, they're getting, you know, dopamine hits from, you know, their addictions to beer and
mm,
stuff and drugs,
mm.
and just the erotic thrill of all that psychopathy. Yeah, I don't know. I just, yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, DB. Really, I do. I understand exactly what you mean. It reminds me, Gary, of what we were saying at the start before the meeting and when we had that conversation on enlightenment and spirituality. You told me to look back on the first chapter or the introduction of Eckhart Tolle's book, Living in the Now, or the Power of Now, something I can't
The
remember.
power of now. The
Power of
power
Now.
of now. I think it
No, I
was.
did actually. I dug it out of the library and I read the first part, and what was very interesting in the introduction it was not what you had pointed to me actually, it was something else. It's when he said, the moment, the turning point for him was when he said a phrase to himself when he was so depressed, so down, so lost. He said, I can't live with myself.
Can't live with myself. Yeah, I remember that.
And,
Yeah,
and then
that's right.
suddenly that opened something in him where he said, but who is this saying I and about
Yeah,
myself?
who's this other person?
These two people, yeah. Who's this other
Mm.
person? And that precipitated him in a spiral of
Yep.
discovery, and it started his path on wherever he went, and he became a spiritual teacher, but after a lot of time and years and stuff like that. But there was a before and after, and that moment, I can't live with myself, is what we're talking about with humanity there at the moment and the alien cortex. You see, humanity hasn't seen the alien cortex. They haven't seen the meta alien cortex. Some people are trying to grasp it. We are trying. We are clawing at it. We are doing it our own way. We're not any better than other people, I think, at this. But we're trying to dissect and look at things with the tools that the alien cortex is giving us. And that's why any solution to the collapse that we're talking about, coming from Keller, Chomsky, Jostoy, XR, everything is doomed, because we're coming there again with the same thing that Eckhart Tolle was saying. I can't live with myself, and we go back again to this psychological preparation or change or revolution that we need to explore, because we cannot face what we're going to face if we don't go there. And we can talk forever about scenarios of collapse and what we can do and preparation and everything like that. But I think that's where we need to dwell a little bit now at this stage.
Yeah,
Um,
one of the things I find interesting about that is that like people on the spiritual path that are doing this stuff, that are going off and meditating or trying to find some kind of spiritual truth. It's hard work. You have to be willing to, suffer a little bit and give things up and all that. And then on the other hand, the people that aren't on that path, that are just in everyday life, they're just under so much stress, and all they're trying to do, is, get through the day and then zone out on TV or whatever to decompress a little bit. But with the people that are doing a more spiritual thing, trying to question and figure out what life is all about, I think it's something that's felt. It's a feeling, and once you feel it, you can't stop. It's like that feeling is like gravity, it pulls you. I can't describe it exactly, but it's hard because I don't know how to um describe that feeling or to give advice on other people how to get that feeling, because you have to be willing to, break away from the dopamine hits of like TV and video games and, drugs and all that. Yeah.
yeah, there's quite a few things to say there. Um, I'll just go back to Sophie for a second. Um, well, there's two things just regarding the fact that the collapse that we're aware of, and we're aware of it, and we're not aware of it simultaneously. And I'm reminded of a talk that Krishnamurti gave once, where he was referring to the fact that we use our mind, thought processes, in other words, the alien cortex, when it's not appropriate to use that. It's like a handy tool that you use when it's appropriate, but you don't use it at the wrong time, in the wrong way. And he used the example of, well, if you, of course, he was in India at the time, back when there might have been a few tigers around, and he's saying, if you're walking along and a tiger jumps out in front of you, or you sense that one's there, you don't really engage in a mental discussion with yourself about what you're going to do regarding this tiger. You just go into some kind of response to it immediately. Doesn't you don't go into a philosophical debate about the dangers of tigers. And so, here's the entire planet and all the human beings clinging desperately to the surface of it here, who are about to be flicked off by their own stupidity. And quite a lot of them are as aware of that situation as somebody about to be eaten by a tiger. But we're intellectualizing it instead of just sort of leaping into some response. I mean, I realise this particular part of the discussion could go on for a couple of hours, but I'll just move on to a thing that struck me when my little nephew was born, and he was premature. And of course, they put those little babies in a plastic box and stuff tubes in them everywhere, and until they're deemed safe enough to be taken out into the real world. And one of the things I noticed was they had strapped something to his wrist, and he was making movements sort of with his arm and jabbing himself in the side every time with this sort of sharp piece of plastic. I could see what was happening. And, at the time I asked him to move it because nobody had noticed what was happening. But the point is, it's a little bit like that with human beings. We're kind of unconsciously doing all this incredible amount of damage without really registering it. You know, and kind of sort of, but the difference is there's no sort of outside agency that's going to come in and rescue us from the situation. Um, and just then what DB said about the spiritual path and it being hard work. And yeah, I guess the paradox of that is that it is hard work, and yet you could also claim that there's nothing to do. Um, and you also got to be careful about this hard work, and getting back to what Sophie said about Eckhart Tolle making that remark about, well, I can't live with myself, so where are these two eyes that are me? And it's a little bit like that on the spiritual path, where if you're engaging in hard work, who is this me who is doing the hard work on me to change me, kind of thing? You've got that sort of paradox that you're dealing with. Um, uh, I've often wondered whether the spiritual being on the spiritual path is simply just remembering now and then that you are on it, and in a way you can't do nothing. But if you are doing something, you probably need to be aware that the you that's doing it is not different from the you that you're working on. Probably not explaining that very well. There's that, and also what you said, DB, about confronting our investment in the society we're in. And I remember Bob and I were having a discussion recently, and he was mentioning people that he knew who were so deeply sort of invested in their lives, and they have to take their holidays and have their new cars, and it was all, and also regarding telling the truth about um, uh, the systems that they were caught up in that forced them to comply with the conventional demands of society, even though that's in some cases it's not morally supportable. But when people's incomes and livelihoods depend on upholding a kind of social myth, uh, they tend to keep doing it, and after a while, probably find that they're completely sucked in by it and believe in it. Um, so yeah, it's amazing, in these discussions. You make a few remarks and it can lead off in so many different lines of inquiry. I'll just leave it there in case someone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I mean, the hard work I was kind of referring to is sort of like, giving up like the cultural ideas that people are brought up with through the schooling system and whatnot. And something happened a couple days ago. So I was with my mom and um the other grandma of my nephew. So it was me, my nephew, and the two grandmas. And my nephew is 2, and there's this little boy sitting across the store from him, and he pointed at the little boy and said, "That's an angel." And then an older gentleman walked by, and he pointed at him and said, "That's a grandpa." And so I was sitting there thinking, like, what the heck happens from, this little kid who's saying such nice things between a 2-year-old and like an adult where people are desperately trying to ignore each other as strangers. It makes me think because it's like we weren't meant to grow up in a world of strangers. We were supposed to be in, more communal settings with people we know. And it's like, yeah, it's just sad.
That's a magical kind of sacred moment, when you hear something like that, isn't it? It's just you realize how far away from the point we get.
But that's what you say, DB, and what you're saying, Gary, makes me think strongly about what you're talking about there about the hard work, the spiritual path and all that. When you look at a child, and I've been surrounded with them too, and I still have some around me, and you realize that most of your work is kind of peeling off layers of shite, basically, that's put on yourself. It's just a kind of I don't know, because underneath is the child, or whatever, the perception, the magical, the connection, everything that we hold sacred is this oneness with this beautiful place we are, and the children have it all, and little by little, with the help of society and the evolution of the alien, evolution and the encouragement given to the alien cortex, to the mind, if you want to call it that way, this being is covered up with layers and layers of things that stop all magic and connection. So I think I wish Hugh was here to express what I want to say, because I know he got it so right, and he would probably be saying a lot of more than what I'm saying and what we're all saying. But I would like to explain it, and I can't find the words, but I see it like a cleaning, just getting rid of that and rid of that and rid of that, and until you get to this fine thing that you reject completely, and that enables you to suddenly be what you really are. And that's when there is no difference between I and myself. But as long as there is this cover, can you explain this better than me, Gary? Because I'm a bit, I don't know, my words are not coming to me easier this morning. There's concepts that I can't translate in words. I just can't.
You mean like the social roles, right? The social roles people have to
Everything,
adopt.
everything really.
Yeah.
Intellect, logic, reasoning, yes, social roles. Um, it's been piled upon you since the age of that you can talk, really, when language starts to shut you down in one box, and then school, and then family, and whatever, army, society, and little by little you disconnect. And when you are in a community, or a small community that's close to nature, you don't have these layers. And I think that for these people it might be natural to not go down the road of absurdity that we see around us. But for most of us who are in this civilization, the work that you're talking about, the hard work that you're talking about, is a work of cleaning, of digging out, and like you're coming out of you've been buried under layers, and you're like in a grave, and you have to come out of it.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of spiritual teachers who've used that analogy of the sky. The sun is in the sky, and from the perspective of being on the ground, sometimes there's a cloudy day, but that doesn't mean that the sun has gone away. It just means that it's covered over. A bit like what you're saying there, being covered over by the accretions of social conditioning and all the rest of it. I can. There's so many ways to approach that question. I think what you could look at is what. Yes, there's this question that it's covered over. I don't know whether it's worth considering that what is accumulating all this covering is this sense of being separate. The ordinary egoic sense that things that occur to this fictitious person called me, and you see, once this person starts to accumulate all these things that are happening to him or her, I think that's where we build up this baggage and this cloud in the sky. It, um, it's possibly why younger children can say things like what DB was just saying, because they've not developed such a sense of separate self. Um, and so, everything is a very direct experience, and the only self that's really there is the real self. Um, and it can remain, their real self can remain what looks to us to be terribly open and vulnerable and sensitive and needing protection. But in fact, it might be worthwhile to think of it as being um, actually something that is uh, that always remains the same, that can't be damaged. That who you really are is not something that needs protecting. Um, so I don't know. Somebody else sounds like they want to jump in there. I'll be
Yeah,
quiet. But yeah,
like the whole cultural conditioning of centralizing, self into the I, that's like that's like building a garrison and creating vulnerabilities where I think the other end of that, where there's openness to experience, I think that's more resilient. Because you can even see that phenomenon with the whole garrison and identity politics on social media. Everyone's getting all offended and stuff because they have this closed experience that they don't want to, change or
yeah.
try to
Oh,
think of things in.
it is an extremity of egoic creation. It certainly is. We can't. Everybody has become their sort of ego has become an egg with such an unbelievably fragile shell that you virtually can't even look at it anymore, without risking doing terrible damage. Um, and not realizing that the thing we're doing terrible damage to is it's a construct. Look, uh, that quotation that is attributed to Einstein. I think Hugh debunked it, but anyway, it's still useful. The one about where he was supposedly said that reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And you could say that about the ego too. Is that we feel it so. At times when you're challenged or insulted or something happens like that, and it's can produce such a strong feeling. Um, and that's, I think that's a spiritual little point. It, that is probably marks the difference between somebody who's concerned with their spiritual quest and somebody who isn't. Because if you are just completely invested in yourself and you feel as though you've been insulted, you then go off down a certain reactive pathway and you're completely lost in that. Um, but I think a spiritually aware person might feel just as much pain, but take that as a very, very, take that as a measure of the size of their ego. If it's a lot of pain, then you become aware that, oh dear, that that's how you actually, I guess the point is, it's how, if you want to locate your ego and find out how much you've got invested in it and all the rest of it, then wait until somebody challenges you like that. And then you've found out an interesting piece of information about yourself. And so I guess that's what I'm saying, that we're heading in this terribly politically correct, highly um, censored society where nobody can offend everybody else, and what it's doing is um, actually helping them to hide their egoic identifications from themselves, and it's actually putting them on a negative spiritual path.
Yeah, that could be. And also, I mean, it's weird too because even with the convention of language, like for me, it makes no sense to even say I because the statement, for instance, I think makes no sense because if you it, for me, if I just be honest with the experience, there are just thoughts, right? There are thoughts. There's no centralized I think because the thoughts just arise. It's sort of like a river or an ocean, light on the ocean water or something. It's hard to describe, but like are the conventions of language like that, like saying I this, I that no longer make
Yeah.
any sense, but it's what I'm stuck with because I don't know any other language or any other expression to use where, people can understand. So if I decide to like refer to my experience or my person in third person, like if I say like this one, then people get awkward or annoyed with it. So it's just so weird.
Oh, language, like the invention of the word I, has been has tricked us into thinking that there really is this person, this identity called I. We've definitely got in a
But that
linguistic.
that happens only around age one or two, sometimes three, that the child starts to say I, because before he doesn't say
Refers to their own name. Yeah, I know. But even
mother or from whatever's around him. So it's quite well. That's just a remark. I don't say it. It's not bringing anything to our conversation.
um,
But what I was
it is,
thinking,
it is so because that's
yeah,
the origin of that. That's the mistake that we're making. That up to a certain point, we're happy enough to call little Johnny, little Johnny. Oh, little Johnny, how's little Johnny feeling today? Has little Johnny finished eating his breakfast yet? And then at some stage, we start to say you. Instead of
oh
use
yeah,
sort of referring to the child in the third
like
person, we start
child
referring
was,
to
yeah.
it's a we've got a kind of a conflict because up
So
to
we
a certain
create
point,
the we create
what's
the.
that?
You mean that as
Yeah, but I'm wondering what is the process that up to a certain point you can handle the child being undifferentiated, sort of being the cosmic I. But then after a little while, it gets too much for it, and we want to turn it into an individual person with an individual I. So there's a kind of unacknowledged anxiety that the adults go through, and it gets too much for them at a certain point, and then they suddenly have to start expecting the child to recognize you and I. Um, but
I
I'm
would
just surmising that. I mean, I don't know.
I would love to call on anthropologists who are listening to us. I think there's one of them who actually contacted us to get information about Hugh and stuff like that. His name is can't remember, something library on Reddit, and he put his real name.
Brilliant,
Yeah, because it would
brilliant
be very
library.
interesting to see. Yeah, brilliant library. Because it would be very interesting to know about what's happening with young children in people who are still hunter gatherers, if there is any left,
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
few anyway, or to know a bit, because it's very crucial what we're talking about, because it is a turning point, isn't it? And I don't know enough about the Piraha and the San people that Hugh was referring to on that subject. I know I've read about what Hugh said about their language and their use of numbers and all these sort of things, but I don't know much about child rearing. I know that their children go through initiations when they get to the teens. I know that there's all sorts of things, and that the kids are children of the tribe, but I don't know about this very thing that you're talking about, Gary, when you start to refer to the person as you instead of the name that you carry, just because you're to different.
Oh, look, I mean, I don't know anything about it either, but I mean, it's noticeable. I just felt that it was a noticeable thing that
It
people
is.
did.
It is.
And
It is. Nobody
you
talks
think
about
that.
it.
Well, the thing is, especially when you find yourself participating in that as well. you become aware that at a certain point you're expecting to use the word you instead of a person, instead of a name, and using the first person instead of the third person to communicate. And at that point, um, and I think this kind of it's probably also part of our wider social problems, where these are little things that should wake people up, that they just kind of skip over them and don't really give them much consideration and sort of go on with their scripted life and think, oh, it's just a perfectly normal part of development that at a certain age you change the way you talk to them, and and that they don't stop to think that there's could be something rather uh, interesting going here that might reveal something, important. If I can just go back a little bit to what DB said about the I, and Sophie and I were having a conversation about this a few days ago, a week or so ago, and just regarding enlightenment. And I'll just go through this because after we had the conversation, I wrote down a little bit of just a little bit of stuff, and I think part of our discussion was, well, uh, how would you know if you were enlightened, or how does anybody else know, or what is this anyway? And it relates to what DB was just saying about this word I, and it's very, very. Alan Watts has discussed this a few times. It was one of his approaches. The I that would know, that wants to know if someone has become awakened, is the same I that has to disappear in order that awakening should appear. So therefore, by definition, the I that wants to know cannot know if I am awakened, because it's got to go away. So Sophie and I at that point got into a bit of a conversation about how was it that people like you seemed to know that they were awakened. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that I can answer that question. But I
Well,
think what we
maybe
go
it's
on.
something that can't be known by the intellect. I watched this really interesting lecture on spiritual alchemy, and the guy in the lecture was talking about how all these spiritual alchemists got really close, but there was one thing that stopped them, and it was because they were using purely their intellect to do all this good work. And he said that what they didn't have was a felt, a deep felt experience, some strong intuition guiding them. He said the reason why they got stopped up or stumbled is because they were going completely with the intellect. And so there wasn't,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
strong intuition or felt emotional current carrying them the whole time.
Well, I think this is what happened uh, historically with alchemy. Is that the impression I get is that uh, the original sort of underlying thing was the personal transformation, and uh, I think it got lost. It was too difficult, and the whole thing became transmuted itself into this more physical, rational thing, which was, oh, well, let's try and transmute all these different things and see if we can make gold. But that was a kind of a substitute. Again, I suppose Hugh would say this is a case of the alien cortex sort of swapping out one thing for the other. Is that in order to preserve itself from being transformed, basically disappearing, I guess. That's a little bit too risky, too dangerous, And the alien cortex is trying to preserve itself, so it hits upon this idea that a better pursuit would be to try and turn lead into gold or something. and so you end up with a kind of intellectual alchemy rather than a spiritual alchemy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That was the problem, is they were, trying to calculate, their way into the spiritual path or enlightenment or whatever, instead of letting something else guide them there, because I think that the intellect has limits that the feelings don't have. That's probably the thing. I don't know exactly, but my guess would be that the intellect has limits that the emotions don't have.
Yeah, well, I suppose at least if you just look at the fact that the intellect is using, I suppose you could claim that the intellect is straitjacketed by uh, its investment in rational thought and the use of language, whereas the feelings are free from the limitations of those two things. Uh, there's probably a lot more could be said about that, I guess, but that's all that comes to mind. Um, if I just bring something else in there, which is this kind of uh, what's the word? Not voyeurism, solipsism. I'm just trying to think. Probably hell. What's the name of the Greek character who was admiring narcissistic? I think. We want to experience our awakening. Yeah, Narcissus. Thanks, Torstein. Yeah. We want to. We not only are kind of desiring this spiritual transformation, the desiring itself is an investment in our separate identity. But then we also want to experience it. We want to be able to see it and witness it. In other words, we still want to be two beings at the same time. Getting back to what Sophie was quoting from Eckhart, um, that um, if there's only one of you, if you're unitary, um, there isn't a separate you that stands to one side to experience what you are. Um, and this was where our discussion had gone. Was the question was, could you have become awakened and know nothing about it? Simply because there was no separate you who would know anything about it. It was just simply how you are. Um, so, I mean, it's an interesting thing to ponder because um, you can't help but get the feeling sometimes that people want something out of awakening, that it's going to um, change something for them that will make them feel better, change their life. And you still have to go back and ask the question is, well, who is this person that it's going to be made better for? And whose life is it that's going to be made better? Because all of that still implies that there's a me that wants to change me, getting back, to what Sophie says about Eckhart. We're still divided. Uh,
Well,
you could go. Sorry, go on, Pete.
yeah, that brings to mind the 10 bulls that you used to like to refer to, and you did too, Gary, in a lot of our conversations. And at the end of the struggle with the bull and the taming of the bull and the bringing him and etc. At the end, you return to the world, and I think that kind of completes the circle. It's like the baby has no notion of the ego. Is in the world, and um, a lot of the struggle I see with what we're talking about it's hard work and stuff like that is also a product of the meta alien cortex, the things, this monster that we have generated as a society, as a civilization, that's also um, weighing heavily on us too. So yeah, I see that completing a circle really. You go probably through this, maybe not consciously or consciously. That's again a conversation. Conversation was also about does this happen gradually or suddenly? Hugh was describing this kind of experiences, epileptic, boom, light, this sort of thing, and we were debating a bit on there's different ways. Maybe I don't know. Who am I to say? I have no idea, but I can perceive that there could be a gradual or a different level, maybe. I don't know, but again, I agree with you. It's who is this I who is looking at this thing to attain, and it is a thing that is that shouldn't be actually the alien cortex is really the mind, the intellect, the this thing telling us that there is an I, there is an ego who has an aim, and the search has no aim. The search has no there's no thing to achieve. If you have that, you're back to square one, really.
Yeah, I think we've got this horror of not being there to experience what it is that we might change into. Uh, we must know that we must be able to verify this and know it somehow from the outside.
And this applies to what the conversation here started today with Chomsky, Keller, the different approaches to collapse. I think that all these analysts and people who are doing a great job. I mean, it's very important that we look at scenarios and stuff like that. But when we come into the domain of what are we going to do? How are we going to act? How are we going to? Now, we had this conversation the week before on collapse when Torstein was explaining things about the history and the timeline of collapse, of human intervention, responsibility in what we do, and thinking that certain actions could have consequences and stuff like that. But on the other hand, it's back again to the notion that there is no escape. It's going to happen. This is the extinction is kind of built into what is this scenario. We have to accept that, and we can look at all these scenarios. We can see that it might be sudden, it might not be, it might be abrupt climate change. We might need resilience. We need communities. We need to localize. We need to do a lot of things to survive. That is human, but. On the other hand, again, when we start to get on board with these big projects and these big organizations who are going to do this and save that we're going the wrong way. Again, we spiritually, it's a mistake, I think, to go into that direction. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well. Can somebody help me there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're trying to manage. I mean, again, I suppose you could just say it was an alien cortex approach that we want a strategy, and we can't process the fact that we haven't really got any agency in the face of such a massive predicament. So in a way, it's the ultimate. I think you called it the meta alien cortex. It's the ultimate challenge to this is a situation that it absolutely is not able to think its way out of, and it's obviously you can see the kind of responses we've got in the world where we're trying absolutely everything. Well, in fairness, probably absolutely everything but anything that's likely to be of any use. But anyway, we are trying all that other stuff. Basically, denial, I guess, distraction and denial. But yeah, I could go had some thoughts about that question of sudden awakening. I don't know if you want to go in that direction or go back more towards. I think there's a dark truth in what we were saying earlier about the Chomsky. DB was talking about what Chomsky said about the degrowth and the collapse and just stop oil and the Keller video about how collapse is inevitable. The thing, and even what XR is doing and all the rest of it, it seems to be rather, I don't know, glib or insincere or something like that. The logical extension of just stop oil is that billions of people will definitely starve to death. That is the next logical step. That's what occurs inevitably as a result of that. And you can see why people don't want to mention that, because it will then lead to instantly to everybody running back to civilization to help keep them alive for a bit longer. But that's not the sorry, Torsten, I saw your comment. I just got distracted. That there's a kind of dishonesty here. That we're portraying this as something that's worth doing, but we're not giving full disclosure to the human race about where that goes, and in a way that is also something that is kicking the ball down the road regarding kicking the can down the road regarding confronting the spiritual point, because as long as we're not facing our death rather bluntly and inevitably, we're going to sort of cling to our identity, our alien cortex, our egoic identity of ourselves, because that's always got this sense of continuity and this death denial is built into it. And so what we're doing is denying ourselves an opportunity for a sort of widespread recognition of death, of the facade of our egoic selves. We're back into the zone of denying all that by not going to the next step with these proposals regarding the cessation of fossil fuel use and all the rest of it. So there's a I just personally, I find it rather annoying or irritating that just that simple statement of just stop oil. If they replace that with what it means, which is just have billions of people die of starvation, I would be interested to see what the result was.
Can I interject? I think that they don't think that, do they, though? They're not consciously thinking they're going to be the inevitable consequence.
Because but this is,
and solar panels are going to replace, those just stop oil guys, who I kind of admire they're quite brave doing something. I'm not doing anything, and they're doing something, even though it's kind of dumb. But I have a respect for people doing something in the face of my ineptitude. And but I think, it's just like, as soon as anybody who's got that narrative, the windmills and solar panels, they become kind of irrelevant. But I think they think that you can just stop oil and then a bunch of windmills are going to make the wheat grow all of a sudden or whatever. so yeah, I think that just everyone's sort of unconscious of everything, and we're probably, you know, if we're all hostages to our fucking alien cortex, everything we're talking about it's all like the alien cortex just fucking with us, and if you get anywhere close, so yeah, this is what I'm very perplexed about the spiritual path as it is, and the way that intersects, I suppose, with the state of the world in general. It's just like, purely for me personally, it's like one dead end after another, where you go, right, well, it's all return to monkey or not, you know, and the only conclusion you can get from understanding the state of the world, at least from the perspective of those of us who share this kind of sense of where civilization has to go, is, you know, are we just, yeah, I don't know, it's because it's even the when I say it to myself, it sounds like this sort of horrible, disingenuous conversations you have with those assholes that read the Guardian and the Telegraph. Okay, I was going to bring up actually that you can stream this. So yeah, okay, so I'll try and get that together. So yeah, so basically there's this kind of issue, because I've been very interested in this idea of enlightenment or awakening for a long time. I've come across people who claim to be awakened or enlightened. I'm sort of lumping those two ideas together. As far as I can tell, it's the same sort of thing. And I've tried to understand what this phenomenon is, because the path of deliberately trying to seek that seems very complicated and involves a lot of commitment. So it's like one of those things where you kind of rationally try to go, well, you know, this enlightenment thing seems like a jolly good step to take to really be embedded in reality and to overcome all these, like, the downfalls of the intellect or the ego or the alien cortex, as we now call it. Okay, fine, what do I do? Why am I going there? And you start to analyze this stuff like someone who's thinking about whether to go to Oxford or Cambridge or whatever to get their degree. And I think about it, and you read these books and you talk to people. Now on YouTube, you've got all these people who are awakened, and they've got this and they've got that, and you look at the characteristics of this state, and you at the same time you're in this conscious battle with your intellectual mind that you can see is just fucking everything up, and then you look around the world and you can see it's the same phenomenon that's fucked up the you know, the natural world, and you see we're all hostages. And then you sort of, you know, in a way it's like, you know, David Icke's description of this like poetic, you know, alien force that's causing you know, these negative effects, and if we all awaken, then somehow, you know, we'll get our you know, strip down to the boxer shorts kind of thing and make a spear out of the nearby stick and go down to the forest and hunt some squirrels or whatever, and that's it really. You know, there's this kind of idea of a human existence that was like pre the formation of the ego and of culture and these kind of bigger social groups. And you know, maybe the enlightenment or awakening thing could take you back to that sort of state of being where you have that closer connection and more healthy interaction with the natural world. Or alternatively, I guess in my mind, you've got the kind of Buddhist monk type of stereotype of someone sitting in some robes and just kind of chilling out really and not being that bothered about anything. And then it all sort of swirls around. I don't know if I'm being particularly incoherent, but because I don't even know what I'm talking about, but it all swirls around in your head and you just go, you know, where does that even take you? Like, so either you just shut up and sit under a banyan tree until whatever this frame of mind is, or what does one actually do, or does one not do?
Yeah, I mean, they're all...
Did you ever read a novel from Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, the one called Bartleby? Because it's the story of this sort of scribe who works in Wall Street, I think, or in some lawyer firm, and he just it becomes extinct himself. Have you ever read that book? He just gives up on communication. He gives up on everything. It's an interesting little small novel. yeah, it's the spirit. His spirit disappears completely in the face of the world he's living in. He completely abandons. And when you mentioned that, Bob, I just thought of this character. It's yeah, he's just. I can't read. If you haven't read the book, I would encourage you to read that little book. It's a good story. But I write it in the comments.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm not familiar with Melville. I haven't read Moby Dick, to my shame. Even you're supposed to, I think. Well, maybe it's more of an obligation on Americans, but yeah, I suppose, yeah, the thing of like fading away or just like sort of ceasing to exist. Well, you know, it's again, I think, but maybe that comes spontaneously in some cases. And you know, Gary mentioned the idea of a spontaneous awakening, which I understand does happen to people. I mean, I don't know if anyone here in this interaction is awakened or not, and I wouldn't know if I could tell if I was, you know, if I didn't do the whole sitting in a cave thing or joining a monastery, which is my stereotypical you know, understanding of what sort of process you'd go through. I don't know how one would spontaneously awaken, and maybe I've spontaneously awakened and I wouldn't know it, you know. I mean, I've had some experiences of stuff that I could say, oh yeah, I've had this thing has happened to me, and you know, I've seen something or blah blah blah. But I mean, I don't know. For all I know, someone's just knocked me on the head, or you know, you had a funny cigarette or something, and it put you in a frame of mind a week later that does something to you. I just, yeah, I guess, well, I'm talking myself into like a kind of nihilistic pointlessness of like, well, I don't know even what my own experience of reality is to any great extent that I could share conversationally with this group or any other. And it's just like almost like there's a sort of funnel where you end up interacting with this like tiny minority of people who seem to be in touch with a similar type of perspective, which has the ring of sanity about it, where the rest of the world seems completely insane. But then you sort of then look in the mirror and go, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm the inmate and these are the other people in the institution, rather than these are the other people who've got some sort of an idea of what is reality, if that makes any sense, because I don't sound particularly coherent to myself at the moment.
Yeah, well, see, yeah, I think the point you just made, sorry, I just can't think of the words you used, but where the, you know, this awakening is something that's happened to these happens, rather than looking at it from the point of view of the fact that you're not becoming something that wasn't always there all the time anyway. I think it goes back to what Sophie was saying earlier about the young child who gets these accretions of socialization building up over the top of their sort of initial angelic self, and it gets covered over and occluded until they don't even recognize what's inside of them themselves, and we lose it completely.
Can we cast it off in any way, though? Is there any? Can you deliberately, you know, who is it who's saying that we should recognize that, and yeah, should we get rid of it, and can we trust that perspective even?
Yeah, well, you see, that was the role that Hugh used to play with us when we were talking about these subjects and when he would bring them up, because he was impersonating a cult leader and a guru a little bit. I mean, we all agreed on that, and that was fine with me. And he would say what you're saying, Bob. You would suddenly say, "Who is it that's saying that?" And he would constantly kind of hit you or prick you and say, you know. So you need people who are. I'm not saying. Who am I to say, like, you, what is awaken? What I wouldn't even, go near that word sometimes. When it started to use it, I found it a bit bizarre to using it. But I think when we had somebody of the dimension and the stature of Hugh, wherever he was leading us on this kind of quest that you're talking about, just yeah, who's this person trying to change the world? Who's this person who thinks that they and he started very well when we were doing the beginning of these meetings, and we composed the 12 desiderata things on a path that was know thyself, oppose Kronos, blah blah. But this had a great, for me personally, this had a great impact because it was I felt I was under the guidance of somebody who knew some stuff, and that was very important. And that's, I think when we come to these conversations, when we go deep into this sort of stuff, I think we can reap an awful lot of good stuff from what he's put us on a good path, I'd say. He's shown us a good direction, and where are the traps? And I think most people here today who've talked about it have seen those traps.
It's all traps, it looks to me.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
traps.
Yeah.
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 And this is Ramana Maharshi, isn't it? This is like, who am I? Who's thinking this? Who's
Well,
doing
yeah,
this?
but with some flavor of him, but it's not divinely, it's not only there. It's of course it's deeply rooted in that, because I think that was the teaching that he had to go through in his cult and his school. So, but there's all sorts of other things that are it's not, you can't enclose. That's what I have a big problem with gurus and spiritual teaching, when they start to be in one. It starts to look like a church. It starts to look like a group and a label, and you belong to that, and that start then you, that's again is bad. Don't go that way. That's dangerous. That don't get. It's nice to be able to say, yeah, that guy thought that guy posed that. But if we start to get into, even if we start to say, if Hugh said that, so it has to be, we really want to keep clear from this sort of thinking. I if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think again, I'm really not an expert on the subject, but
But that's a good thing.
Well, no, yeah, well, maybe it'd feel better to think we were an expert. I suppose it might be a bit more comforting. But yeah, no, I mean, my understanding is like, and again, I've sort of followed or had an interest in the Buddha and all of this, and it seems that this particular character would have been a bit pissed off to discover that he'd sort of launched a bunch of different sort of churches or religious organizations. So that's sort of like, maybe that's an unavoidable thing. But yeah, I mean, in theory, it's a subjective process, I guess, that you could, if you don't attach to one particular thing, there do seem to be these similar streams, though, of how to overcome the alien cortex by I don't think so. GS. So so how to like defeat the alien cortex, either by going into this process of sitting in a cave and making the alien cortex so bored that it goes away, basically, or otherwise by sort of looking back towards our hunter-gatherer ancestors and trying to embrace something. I think those seem to be the two kind of paths that I understand. So yeah, when you look at the famous tribes of people that are hanging in there in the jungle, they seem to have this awakened or present state of mind, or otherwise it's those monks in their robes sitting in a cave. And so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that brings back this whole the city versus the farm people. I'm being sort of strongly led to doing some gardening at the moment, and I realize how little connection I have. I've overwatered some of my plants. I don't communicate with them at all. When I have no feeling for the process, which I find slightly weird. And I guess my thing that pops into my mind is, can you find this sort of awakening within the context of modern civilization at all, or do you have to physically extract yourself from it? I guess is the question that comes to mind. Do you have to go and leave it?
It's hard to know, isn't it? It's hard to know. I don't know. I don't know. Is it incompatible? I have no idea. Personal experience, I couldn't really tell you. Myself, I don't know.
I mean, civilization is a product of the brain damage caused by the alien cortex slash ego slash whatever intellect.
Well, you have to find a place, probably, but it doesn't have to be necessarily geographic. I suppose there is a space inside you where you can probably, whether I'm no teacher. I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Well, if you're doing meditation in Hugh's, what do you call it, the Sirius website, his suggestion was just to find a place that's quiet and peaceful and practice meditation on the Sirius website on the Extinctionati a while back with his instructions on how to do proper meditation. So basically, yeah, just find a place that's quiet and peaceful and practice it rigorously.
Yeah, but that's a kind of very open-ended. I mean, I'm not really looking for. I'm perplexed because it's very open-ended, and I think that comes back to that thing of you're going, well, okay, I feel like this is a viable path, or this is a path to awakening, but then you have to have a sort of level of faith, I guess, in that particular methodology or a particular methodology, which, you know, maybe the method that Hugh described, and other people have other views on the subject, but you have to pick one and sort of stick with it and then attempt to become a virtuosic meditator, because it's not a straightforward thing. I mean, just as a case in point, the light show phosphine thing is something that I think takes quite a bit of dedication to be able to look at your third eye and all of this stuff and activate the what's it called, the thingy, the pineapple in your head.
Pineal gland.
Oh, that was it. Yeah, sorry, the name eludes me. But yeah, so it's like, again, you're doing. I remember reading a book years and years ago in my late teens or early 20s, which describes this idea of the spiritual supermarket, where we're now in the modern world sort of exposed to, and at the time there was like a flourishing of cheap printed books before the internet, if anyone remembers that, and you could get these editions of books because there was some sort of, in the UK anyway, there was a change in some sort of cartel behavior from the publishers, and suddenly there were all these books released very cheaply and you could buy all these books, and it was a cheap book that I found. The guy did a sort of summary of every kind of spiritual magical practice you can think of and said, we're now living in a spiritual supermarket, and you can kind of wheel your trolley through the aisles and you can pick a bit of this and pick a bit of that and so on and so forth, and you find that whatever works for you or whatever. Anyway, I feel like I'm very incoherently rambling, but the idea of like, okay, here, pick your method. So let's say I quite like Hugh's description of the meditation thing. It took me a little while to sort of figure out what it was supposed to be, and then somebody posted a video of an Indian lady that sort of clarified what was meant to happen, and I've been trying to do this, blah blah blah, and I want to say without success, but I have no sense of what success would entail anyway. And then it's like trying to sort of teach yourself how to play Chopin by just sort of sitting in front of a piano and thinking about Chopin tunes and thinking that somehow, I don't think that achieving a level of virtuosity can be done like that. You actually need someone to say, look, you need to put your fingers here, and actually before you can play Chopin, you need to learn how to play Happy Birthday and whatever.
Yeah, but it's not a technique, Bob. It's not a it's just brilliant. I mean, it's just so good because you've covered so much ground. Do nothing. Even I think it was
do nothing
Osho.
appeals to me tremendously, Gary. To be honest.
That's it. But genuinely do it. Don't. the you that is going to do this to change you is not there to start with, to begin with.
Yeah.
It's a futile exercise.
Yeah, I know that already. Yeah, strangely enough, but I know it and don't.
It's just like Einstein and his persistence of the sense of things being there which aren't there is the you that's there that you're going to change, that you're absolutely convinced is there, is not there, even though it's a very persistent illusion.
Mhm.
You know, and the very sense of applying any effort to this is evidence that all that's occurred is that the alien cortex has divided itself into two, and one half of it is having an arm wrestle with the other half of it. And plainly, this is just not going to go anywhere at all. You've got to abandon the battlefield completely. Just walk out of the boxing ring. Just go out of the walk past everybody. Go outside. Leave. Just go outside where it's quiet. Just leave the battleground. And there's I think it was Osho, Bhagwan Rajneesh in his earlier days, could be mistaken, but I think he actually went through that stage on his spiritual journey, where he just sort of, oh, fuck this, and just gave up anything, just absolutely gave the whole thing up. And at the point where he gave up, that's when everything happened for him. But he had to genuinely give up, like genuinely leave the area, just fucking, And I think if you're getting tired, if you feel as though you're getting tied up with what you refer to as this nihilistic inner dialogue, nihilistic depending on how you want to pronounce it, inner dialogue, it becomes paralytic. And so maybe when that dialogue on the spiritual thing has become so paralytic, then actually go with that. Because the fact that you can make no progress in this dialogue is probably a message to stop. Because it's like oh, I don't know, you might be out somewhere and end up wading in some mud, which becomes deeper and deeper and deeper until you realize you're in a terrible mire, and it's almost you've sunk up to your waist and then your chest, and it's become almost impossible to take one step forward because it's just takes too much effort to move through the mud and slush, and so you at some case you stop, and when you stop the struggle, you've got a chance to realize that the struggle against all this is not getting anywhere. It's got no future. And that's when there's a possibility of something different. So you still are stuck in a paradox. We're always going to find, I think, that we're stuck in a paradox because people could then say, oh, okay, well, if I stop, then nothing happens. I think you've still got to ask yourself ultimately, well, yeah, all right, so maybe nothing is happening, but what was it in me that wanted something to happen anyway, and what was I expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that you've got the that comes back to then getting the alien cortex to shut the fuck up for 5 minutes.
No, but don't get it to do anything because it's just
No.
one part of it trying to get the other part of it to do anything.
Yeah,
You've got to actually just leave there. And that's not an action, it's not a movement, it's not a decision, it's not something stated in words. It's quite, in a way, outside of language and thought.
yeah,
It's just that if that starts to arise, you just let it go. To just abandon it. It'll repeatedly return to tempt you back into this self-reinforced self thing where the alien cortex divides itself and argues with itself, which only ends up being a kind of isometric exercise that the alien cortex engages in to strengthen itself.
yeah.
The only way. Go on, sorry.
I just felt like I want to narrate like my inner talk is going, Gary is telling me to do shamatha. And it's like this endless thing. But yeah, just look, fuck off, voice in my head, fuck off. So,
It's not.
Don't even tell it to fuck off,
No.
because that's still part of you.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of just, it will arise to a certain extent, and you become aware of it. As soon as you become aware of it, you just leave it.
I think in the description that Hugh was giving of this, the meditation that he was suggesting would follow, I think the image of the phosphines was quite interesting, because they were pure products of a visual part of the brain that is not it's not lights that are perceived, so they're not coming from the outside world, and they don't follow the normal neural pathways. They are pure products of the alien cortex, of this kind of, so if you are contemplating them, he was saying that it's like if you're getting the alien cortex to look at himself, and you kind of create this kind of shortcut when suddenly your attention is kind of turning the alien cortex towards itself, and in that process you can initiate a kind of destruction. I don't know if I got it right, but I could, that's the way I was understanding it. And you're not really doing anything there, because you're just sitting still and letting things happen, and just, I kind of like that idea, because I think the more you put it offline, the more time you spend distracting and mirroring this thing to itself, you kind of get into a place where you can initiate certain processes without even trying to analyze it. I think it's just the idea, the process is very interesting.
That's true. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, putting the alien cortex offline, disconnecting it.
It's being interesting.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my more intellectual friends. We were going on and on about like spirituality and philosophy and stuff. And then at the end, he got annoyed with me because he said, "You're saying all this contradictory stuff. Are you a sophist? Do you think you're enlightened or something?" And I'm like, who wants to know and why? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point. That's what it comes down to. See, if you,
And the thing is like I'm in the conversation, I wasn't even like trying to be a smartass. Like I literally feel like that. Like it's a
no,
literally
because see,
felt.
what the other person is, the only frame that the other person would have had to make sense of this was to look at it as though you were talking from an individual ego-based self perspective. And
Yeah,
so,
like I know what I say when I was talking to him, I was semi-aware that I was being contradictory and stuff. Like when he talked to me about like religious stuff, he's saying, "Yeah, you talk about all this stuff, but what does it all mean?" I'm like, "I don't know. Like I have these dreams, but whatever gods I see in my dreams never talk. They do stuff. They create, they destroy, and all that kind of stuff, but there's no words. There's just images." It can't
yeah.
you can't understand this stuff intellectually, so I don't talk about it.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how the alien cortex or the mind always wants to be able to experience this, or somehow annex it, or claim it as something of its own.
Yeah, and another thing too, it came up because his philosophy, he claims to be a bit of an existentialist, and then I annoyed him a little bit more for that, and he said, "Okay, then what's the meaning of life?" And I said again, "Who wants to know and why? Why do you need a meaning to life? Why? Why does it matter?"
Good point. Good
And
point. Because
that's true.
all the time. They always tell you, but you have to have a meaning. There has to be a meaning. I mean, this creation, it has to, and that is another trap.
It's like I literally feel like that because it don't make sense. It makes no sense. These questions, they make no sense at all. Um, yeah, it just makes no sense.
See, I guess you would not ask the question. I think the question of meaning is that, I don't know, maybe it sounds too esoteric, but the meaning of a thing, or the meaning that is ascribed to a thing, has to be bestowed upon it from outside. Um, that uh, like if you take a hammer, for instance, it has no. You couldn't say it has a meaning if it's just in isolation. Somebody um, there has to be an outside which says that, oh, the meaning of the hammer is its use as a tool for making nails go in. But the hammer doesn't know anything about that, and the hammer in isolation can't have that meaning ascribed to it. Uh, um, you know, if you want to accept the proposition that who you really are is just everything, without any sense of separation, then there's nothing outside of that. So there's therefore actually no meaning apart from just existence itself. Uh, you only, I think it's evidence of our disconnection and isolation and separativeness that we're asking for there to be a meaning. That's evidence that we're in the wrong. If you're asking that question, then
Y-
you've already identified the fact that you're in the wrong place, or you're looking at it from the wrong point of view, or wrong, not point of view. That you're inhabiting a little corner, looking out at everything else, rather than being everything else, looking at the little corner.
Yeah, it's the delusion, right? The delusion of being isolated in some kind of silo. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes ask people if they really start talking. I mean, I'm like Earth, all life on it, all the molecules and energy and the entire expanse of the ability to experience simultaneously, and then tell me you're alone.
You are never alone, and you are never alone.
Exactly,
Like,
because I don't think
you
I'm not
can't.
sure. Well, I can't speak for I can't speak for people, but how many people sit down and try to imagine the simultaneous movement and experiencing of everything?
Yeah, but that's his. That's why he was using the term "you psychosis" as opposed to psychosis, because what is psychotic is to feel separate. What the society calls psychosis is what we're talking about. Is connectedness and feeling. You see, so we're going into a thing of words again, which is a trap again. But yeah, if you look to the root of psychosis and new psychosis, that we're going into a whole new realm. But I remember something, Gary, that we were saying when we were having this conversation a week ago, roughly, about awakening again, and we were saying, how does somebody know that he is awakened, and the circumstances and that. And I was telling you, I think, or you were telling me, there's these people you come across, and even in urban areas, like that woman at the till in a supermarket could be, and you feel that you've met somebody who is totally there, who's totally connected, who's totally awakened, and without any pretense of any kind, you encounter these people in the world, whether urban or not, because you don't probably encounter a lot of people if you're in the wild, because there's not many people. But you've got these people who are absolutely unassuming, and they are there. They've got it all. So this idea of awakening can be much more simple than we've been talking about. It is there. It is there around us.
Um, yeah, I think one of the things that uh, there's a great risk in making hard work out of something, but that yeah, this is. I don't know, maybe it's just my perspective on this, but it just seems to me that this should not be a thing that is a cause for stress and effort, and um, that again, that just comes back to the alien cortex having little battles with itself. And there is I remember we did actually discuss this with Hugh, but unfortunately I cannot remember what his response was regarding, what you're just referring to, this concept that this these everyday Buddhas, these people who strike you as um, having their act together, so to speak. Because the other side of people like that is that they appear to be unaware of it. And if you actually tried to engage them in a conversation about this, they wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about. So they're kind of awakened, but they're unconscious of it. It's in a way almost like the angelic state of a small child. That they're obviously completely connected up, but they don't know anything about it. And so there is a certain sense in which awakening, in the sense that Hugh had it, needs to be known. Um, uh, but I can't honestly, I think one of the things in having a discussion like this is to not go further than to sort of not exceed your qualifications, so to speak.
Well,
Um,
I think I remember what you were talking about. When I think Q said that people like that who are just automatically there. Yeah, people like us who grow up in industrialized civilization, I think I'm not sure if it's whether or not it's a culturally conditioned thing or if it's literally like a part of your brain that automatically just does this. I kind of think it's more cultural that they pretty much give you this separate sense of self growing up, and then you have to, growing up in this culture, you have to do the sort of, I guess, a good way to put it is Joseph Campbell's hero journey, as an expression to step outside the culture and to yourself and go on that journey however you express it. I don't know how to use words to express it, but
oh
yeah.
yeah, I mean it's very, also bound up in that is that little biblical quote about that you're going to follow these teachings and become like children again. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. And
so go on, sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, this is gonna be kind of weird, but have any of you seen that James Cameron Avatar movie? Um, with those Na'vi people on the planet Pandora. Yeah, I realized something interesting about that. So the main character in that show, the reason why he was able to change and join the Na'vi people at the end is not only that he, fight the evil empire and kick them off of the planet, but the guy had nothing to lose. Like he had no attachments to the system that would have caused him to have ulterior motives. If anything, the system, like he fought a war and so he got paralyzed, and that's why he was going into that avatar body, and he felt great in there. The system took stuff away from him. It took his spine, and he had no vestments. He had no, property, no emotional investment in the system. And so, yeah, you're right. In a way, you have to turn yourself into baby again. Yeah, you have to turn yourself into baby and not have a full cup so you're able to constantly learn new things and experience new things without being completely reflexive.
Yeah. Um, the thing is, you might become as a child again, but it doesn't mean you forget all of your life experiences or the things that you've learned. I think what that means is that you don't adopt that as that accretion of experience and learning as some kind of identity. It's just stuff that's there that you can use if you need to. But it isn't it isn't it isn't it isn't who you are. Who you are underneath that.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
if I may add, this ties in very well to the attitude to collapse. Because once you, I don't know when it happened for most of you, but once you realized the state of things, and when you realized that you're actually a doomer, once you give up on hope and sorts of illusions and utopias and greenwashing and all the shite that you probably have studied before you became aware, you are in a similar place. There is a parallel between what we're talking now and the initial conversation we were having about collapse, I think. Actually, to completely change the subject, because this is completely different. It's the way my brain works. Sometimes I just go doom doom. And I remember Gary said something about Paul Beckwith and his latest atmospheric rivers and the impact of that on the various extreme events. And I was wondering, Gary, is that really new? Because I listened to most of it, not all of it, because Paul Beckwith sometimes bores me so much that I can't listen to him too long. But is that bringing something new, or do you think, or is it just
Yeah, I think what he was saying was that obviously, uh, the scientific community already knew about the phenomenon of atmospheric rivers, which is sort of low altitude, very wet um, air currents, which can carry vast amounts of moisture from basically the uh, equatorial regions into the higher latitudes. The new piece of information that apparently that's just come is that is the result of the distortion of the jet stream, and which has been and the fact that as a result of that, these atmospheric rivers are now carrying moisture much further into the high latitudes than they were previously. And so they studied the actual, this was the impetus to study the effect of these atmospheric rivers on Arctic and Antarctic ice melting, and found that this effect was actually very large indeed, and extremely significant, and brings forward the estimates for increases the estimates for ice loss in the polar regions substantially. So yeah, apparently this basically the report on the effect of the atmospheric rivers on polar regions was the new piece of news that he was referring to there. Yeah. So and it basically what it does is just bring forward the estimates for ice loss. It brings them forward by many decades. I think he was talking about 5 to 7 meters of sea level rise by 2070, which is, I mean, it doesn't mean that on the 29th of December or 30th of December, 2069, the sea level suddenly goes up by 7 meters. If you look at that and spread it out between now and then, it's a meter a decade, if you want to look at it, which is massive, and that's apparently what is now occurring. So that was the essence of that. And just I wanted to make a point regarding what was said earlier about nothing to lose and collapse, is that I think this was behind what Hugh was doing with the manifesto, see what DB was saying about a person who had nothing to lose in that movie or whatever it was, being able to act in, being able to act where they would not have acted before, or being able to act in a much more effective or major way is this I the manifesto was concerned with that, was presenting a scenario that was undeniable and conclusive and which had no escape in it, and therefore you had presenting people with a situation where they had no longer had anything to lose, and having nothing to lose is extraordinarily liberating. Um, we all think we've got something to lose, and that's what holds us back. Uh, uh, and I think this is one of those essential things that lies behind the sense, the question of spiritual awakening is
Yeah,
that,
yeah, Gary.
you know,
If I may add, it's also the importance of having a breakdown to have a breakthrough, and that also is a big. I mean, personally, I mean, I have had all those breakthroughs after some breakdowns and some terrible ones sometimes, and it's just I think that we can't. Once you realize the catastrophe we're in, when I did years ago, and the terrible feeling of loss of species and plants extinctions and the predicaments human beings are in, but also the natural, mostly the natural world, which we can't dissociate from ourselves. The breakdown that happens then enables you to realize that you have lost everything. Everything is being lost. So that's when suddenly you start another path.
yeah, it's kind of a frightening thing to think about. Um, but you know, when it actually occurs, you probably find an immense sense of relief. Uh, yeah. Uh, Even thinking about that just for a moment, it's not hard to sort of feel the weight of all of all of your personal concerns and things that you're worried about and trying to preserve and keep and hold on to. And I'm just wondering, Sophie, we're almost at 2 hours. Do we want to end up or go on for a little bit longer? Just in case the recording ends again.
Yeah, the recording will end in about 10 minutes according to my clock because we started at 10 minutes past the hour. So it's up
Yeah.
to you. If you want to continue on, I'm happy to. I'm just not what anybody else thinks is grand.
Anybody else want to carry on for a bit longer, or would it be a good time to wind up?
I'm not sure. I mean, have we covered everything that we meant to? Have we talked? Because, I mean, I suppose we could go a bit longer because,
Yeah,
uh,
We
I
could go on
mean,
for 24 hours, I suppose,
we,
but
we could. Yes, we could.
no, no, no. Let's make Hugh happy and go for 6 hours. Just kidding.
we have to do this. I'd say maybe in the winter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think maybe just leave it there because um, we can start afresh with a new topic next time, I guess. And
Well, one of the things I was wondering before that though was like, so we were talking about the what was his name, Arthur Keller, and the fourth scenario. So we have the inevitable collapse coming.
yeah,
there's nothing we can do on a grand scale to avoid it. It's gonna be ugly. Yeah, don't really expect any kind of millenarian utopian revolution to happen because I don't know about anyone else, but I don't see the subjectivity there for that. So yeah, it's gonna be ugly. Those in power are gonna make sure everything occurs in such a way that they're always gonna be on top, which makes it even uglier. Because I feel like at the end of the day, with the system, the whole problem is class warfare and exploitation. So unless people are willing to actually deal with the power hierarchy, whatever that is, finance, ruling elites or whatever, if they're not willing to deal with that, we're just doomed. If you let the exploiters sit on top of a hierarchy and continue running the machine of exploitation. And no one is challenging that. In America especially, it's, oh, this president is bad, that president is bad, and then no one is saying the machine is bad.
Yeah.
Well, in
No.
this,
Again, go on. Go on.
oh, no, just a so short thing, Harry. In the scenario 4, there is two kind of curves. There's a very, very abrupt, dangerous, horrible one, and there's one that's bad, but it can be mentioned that can be a little bit softened by what you say, by challenging certain scenarios. So I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I mean, that would only occur though if you get government to cooperate with you, which I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, but he would not, because Arthur Keller is, in a way, he's not a liberal, but I'd say in a certain way, he's not going to mention that on his audience that are universities and stuff like that. He's not going to mention that you can undermine. I mean, the undermined. Isn't that a funny? Undermine the. That was interesting. But yeah, that could be a subject for another conversation, because we already touched that on Collapse last week, about things to do to undermine the powers that are, and things like that. But I'd say we could talk about this again. We could talk about this again.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just was reminded of when I left Oslo, I had to rid myself of a couple thousand books from my bookshelves because I was moving. And afterwards, that kind of struck me as a cool image for what a total collapse means. It's like, because to me I was like, oh my god, all those books I read, or some of them I haven't read, some of them I read many times, and just to put it in perspective for myself, I had to remind myself that we are going to lose everything we've built, like music, architecture, art, literature, philosophy. Everything we ever built as human beings is going down the drain in a full collapse, and that kind of made it a bit easier to let rid of all those books that I had in my bookshelf. Anyway, so I don't know if that helps anyone else, but it's like, yeah, maybe that our small little day-to-day things become irrelevant, in the bigger scheme of things.
Yeah, experiences like that are very informative, I guess. I think I remember Hugh talking about that when he moved onto his boat, and how he had to get rid of a lot of things that he owned. And what that experience was like at that stage. But yeah, when you look at what we're throwing away as a civilization, and not just noble creations, but also if we throw ourselves away completely, then we lose sort of self-conscious awareness from the planet. It may never come back. So it's a significant thing to contemplate. So we'll finish it there, Sophie, before you have to re-record.
Yeah, don't forget
Yeah.
we mean to few of us to survive if possible. Okay.
Yeah, well, this is the point, but
Let's not get
because we're
but
anyway.
there's also this survival thing to keep in mind too.
Yeah, the become baby, return to monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are we going to just have 30 seconds of silence and then stop the recording? Can everybody handle 30 seconds of silence? Is that okay? Or it's a lot longer than you think. Just start that. Yeah. All right. We're starting now. Okay. Not sure that I lost count, but anyway. So thanks everybody for contributing, and we look forward with great anticipation to the next meeting, I guess.
And there might be a meeting in the middle of the week. We'll keep watch the sub, and there will be information, an interview. Okay.
Great. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, thanks, Sophie. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks,
Goodbye now.
everybody.
Bye
Bye
everyone.
then.
So.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.